I think my grandfather might be a cat. No way, hear me out. He loves tuna. He's constantly knocking things off the counter. There was one time I walked in on him licking himself clean. And he has 9 lives. Seriously, that man does not die. First, he's a war veteran. After his service, he was on a boat that just conveniently exploded, swimming to safety without issue. Later in life, he canceled a flight last minute, finding out the day after that it had crashed. He also once decided to contribute to solving New Jersey's deer overpopulation problem by smashing into one with his motorcycle, walking away unscathed because his fall was broken by a container of dental floss in his pocket. But there was one near-death experience that was a little different, when he was diagnosed with ALS and told he had 2 months to live. A misdiagnosis, thank God. But something about that experience really affected him. He was forced to come to terms with his mortality. The thing is, he's not unique. It's something that everybody has to do eventually, but it seems like we want to avoid thinking about it as much as possible, portraying death as this great evil and thus ignoring it. Now, don't get me wrong. Death can certainly be tragic, but it often isn't. And I fear that author Lawrence R. Samuel was right when he said that our fear of death is so great that it lies buried deep within our subconscious. So today, let's first scratch at how we deal with mortality. Then we'll pounce on the effects of our unhealthy attitude before finally finding a perfect solution. It's obvious why death is scary. We have no control over it. We don't know how or when it'll happen, just that it's inevitable. Health studies professor Dr. David Sanfilippo states that death is viewed as an encroachment on life instead of part of life. Logically, this makes sense. Living is good, dying is bad. It's like taxes. Don't think about it too hard until a man in a black suit comes knocking at your door. Professor Alan Kelly here, however, argues that this mentality has turned America into a death-denying society. And you don't have to look too far to see he's right. Halloween. What was once a holiday to celebrate dead saints has been reduced for a way for children to collect candy and parents to collect dental bills. Religion. Practically every single one of them has some notion of life after death, be it reincarnation or heaven. Aging. Look, vanity is one thing, but when tech billionaire Brian Johnson swaps blood with his son to look young, you have to wonder, are we going too far with this? And I'm probably the first person you've seen talk about death in an oratory, but why aren't we talking about this more? Death is one of the few universal human experiences in existence, but yet, psychologist Ernest Becker argues that the majority of human actions are taken as a means to evade or ignore death. This means that when it does happen, we react strongly. Just look at somebody like Queen Elizabeth. Super great leader, unless you're Irish, or Kenyan, or Princess Diana. When the Queen died, the world wept. She was 96 years old. What's so shocking about a 96-year-old dying? What, did you expect her to be immortal or something? And look, I get it. She's royalty. But our disposition towards death makes anybody's passing just as scary. Our unhealthy relationship with death is more than just a quirk of the mind, though. Ignoring it begets pain and stress for the ones that have to deal with it. In the 1990s, Canadian activist Sue Rodriguez was diagnosed with ALS. Knowing her fate, and not wanting to see herself waste away, she sought a physician to end her life. But euthanasia was illegal. She pleaded to the government for an exemption, arguing, "If I cannot consent to my death, whose body is this? Who owns my life?" She lost the case 5-4. Sue died 2 years later. In pain. In vain. When we prolong life at any cost, it only causes unnecessary suffering in our most vulnerable people. And in a country where only 10 of 50 states have legalized euthanasia, this problem still plagues our nation. But this issue isn't limited to such extremes. Take, for example, writer Sophia Lorenzi. When her father died in 2018, she was suddenly plunged into a world of incomprehensible jargon. In the 5 days between his death and funeral, she had to decipher the difference between a coffin and a casket, an heir or a beneficiary, whether to inter or intern her father's ashes. But that marked just the beginning of the 2 years it took her to get her father's affairs in order. All while still in shock. All while still grieving. And she isn't alone. Less than half of Americans over the age of 55 even have a will. Fewer than a third have an advance directive for end-of-life care. And only 7% have pre-planned a funeral. So I ask, why ignore death when doing so only hurts the ones we love? When you die, who's going to be the one to pick up the pieces? I had to answer all these questions and more when, in 2019, my mother got seriously sick. Death suddenly became so real. For the first time in my life, I had to consider the possibility of losing someone I love. I wished for more time. I wished I could have said I love you more often. I wished I could have been a better son. And it hurt. It hurt to know that I had taken the time I had with her for granted. It hurt to realize that one day I would have to live my life without her. Fortunately, after some time, she recovered. But the wishes persisted. I still make the most of every second I have with her. I still tell her I love you every chance I get because I don't want to wish like that ever again. Confronting death in such a personal manner made me realize we truly take our lives for granted, and I'm not the only one. Bronnie Ware, a palliative care nurse, spent years caring for people on their deathbeds. In moments of clarity, her patients expressed regrets. Regrets of not living life to the fullest. Regrets of living a life of stress instead of one of happiness. In the end, people tend to realize that they've been living wrong. And I think it's time we stop waiting till it's too late to appreciate the life we have. So let's start from square one. Death is unavoidable. We all know that, but we don't have to avoid it. Psychotherapist Joe Nash states that coming to terms with death is essential to living life fully. We have to live with purpose, without the fears of mortality interfering. And the best way of doing that is getting comfortable with death. Now, don't go kissing corpses, but think about your mortality. Have calm, reflective moments where you can expose yourself to it, remind yourself of it, and plan for it. Write your will, arrange your funeral, and get your affairs in order so that your family won't be burdened by logistics while grieving. And after that, replace your apprehension with appreciation. Appreciate your finite being. Appreciate the fragility of life. That aging is a privilege. But most importantly, appreciate the legacy you leave behind. Legacy gives our lives purpose and direction. It allows us to leave behind a piece of ourselves after we're gone, to make the world a better place for future generations, to raise our fellow man. And the best part is, every action, every interaction, every transaction we make contributes to that legacy. So, for our future, for our children's future, let's sow the seeds of a better tomorrow, even if we may not be around to reap the rewards. After all, we can't all be like my grandfather, and you only live once, so spend your life wisely. Author Chuck Palahniuk put it simply, we all die. The goal isn't to live forever, it's to make something that will. And I think that's beautiful, that at the end of the day, our stumbles will be forgotten, but we can use our experiences to make the world a better place. So let's do that. What are we waiting for? Death?